Hello and welcome to another tutorial video. In today's episode, if you will, I'm going to be talking about the different energy types within the game. So by now you should know that there are different types of beams. So there's arc beams, standard beams, dual beams, etc. There's different kinds of cannons. There's arc cannons, dual heavy cannons, single cannons, turrets, all different types of weapons for everyone. Now, we're going to go into beam for now, just to have a look at the energy damage types. So we'll start with antiproton, because that's the first one on the list. If you look to the right hand side of the screen, you'll see that we've got 330 antiproton damage, lovely. That's going to be the same for every type that we look at. Doesn't matter what weapon you use, the damage is always the same. Okay, this is a common misconception that different weapons have different damage types. That's simply not true. They just have different effects on them. So if we look at antiproton, we can see that underneath the minus 10 weapon power itself, while this weapon is firing, you'll see there's plus 20 crit severity bonus. What that means is effectively plus 20% critical damage when you get a critical hit. So if you have 100% critical severity, when you critical an enemy, you will do double damage. And it scales on and on for as much crit severity that you have. Now, antiproton's a little bit special because this doesn't have a chance to happen. Okay, no RNG. For those that don't know, RNG means random number generator. Effectively, is a gamble as to whether something's going to work or not. This doesn't have any of that. It's guaranteed 100% of the time you get that additional 20% critical severity bonus. The sheer fact that this doesn't have a chance to happen is why this is one of the best weapon types in the game. Now, quickly moving on, because I don't want to throw too much opinion stuff in here. Disruptor Beam Array. Again, you'll see the damage is exactly the same, just as we showed at the start of the video. If this one has a 2.5% chance to apply minus 10 all damage resistance for 15 seconds. Now, at the risk of sounding like I'm just reading off what it said in the description, that's what it does. What makes this interesting is that that minus 10 to all damage resistance is not just for you. That applies to the enemy that you put that effect on. And what that means is any allies that you have, or hanger pets, or any other target of any kind that's hitting that enemy will also benefit from that debuff that you just put on the enemy. They will all gain that increase in damage because you've reduced their damage resistance, which again makes Disruptor one of the best weapon types in the game. It does only have a 2.5% chance, and I'll just cover this once instead of going through it with all the weapon types. That 2.5% chance is at each firing cycle of the weapon. So even if you have fire at will, rapid fire, anything like that, that hits multiple times per firing cycle on an enemy, they recently nerfed that. That doesn't work anymore. Effectively, the chance to put an effect on an enemy is once per second. You cannot increase it. It simply is what it is. So every second, with each weapon that you've got, you have a 2.5% chance to apply said effect. So moving on to Phaser, this one is a 2.5% chance to turn off a random subsystem. In PvE, your only real things that you want to turn off are either shields or weapons. Weapons so that they don't hurt you anymore, or shields so that you can kill them really quickly. If you turn off engines, okay, you do get the increase with them not having as much evasion. You know, they can't dodge you as much. Their defense is a lot lower. But it only lasts for a very limited time. Unless you turn off the shields or the weapons, personally, I don't think you get a very much noticeable effect from this. But there are a lot of consoles that enhance Phaser that you can get either really cheap or for free. Most budget builds will include Phaser because it's very cheap to make them very powerful. The only downside that you're going to have to live with is that 2.5% chance to turn off a subsystem 5 seconds is a little bit poo, because from the way I see it, it's not a 2.5% chance to turn off a random subsystem. The only one I really want it to turn off is shields, so I can kill them quicker. So for me, this is a 0.6125% chance for it to do something. That number may be wrong. It's quite late where I am. A little bit tired. So apologies if the maths isn't perfect. Moving on to Plasma. This one's the easiest one to explain. All this does is apply a damage over time effect on the enemy. It does ignore shields, which is quite nice. Frankly, if it didn't, this wouldn't even be worth mentioning. We'd simply move on. Because, I mean, you can see here, the base damage is 25, so it's not great. You go to space, you'll see that the plasma damage on your weapon, if you have 5 fully epic Mark 14 tactical consoles and other things boosting your plasma damage, you can maybe get that beam array up to just over 1,000, maybe 1,100. That plasma damage is still only going to be a few hundred per second. So the reality of it is, even with max possible damage enhancing equipment, it's never going to do that much damage. But it is a nice little effect. It does seem to work really quite often. And again, it ignores shields, so hey, why not? Polaron. Now this one, I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you a bit of an opinion on. In PvE, this particular weapon type is completely and utterly useless. Reducing power levels of an enemy in PvE has seemingly no effect whatsoever. Now theoretically, minus 25 to shields means that you have, 25% less shield resistance. Doesn't seem to make any real applicable effect to the enemy. Minus 25 to power level, they still hit you almost as hard. I have tested it extensively. For all intents and purposes, each of the subsystems that this affects on a PvE enemy, now whether this is intended or not, this seems to have virtually no effect whatsoever. Now in PvP, this used to be an extremely good weapon type. You could completely shut down an opponent without even having to worry about any kind of skill. You could use this, Plasmonic Leech, if you're at Klingon side, Astana Simulator, and you'd effectively stop your opponent from being able to do anything by reducing their power level solo. They couldn't even activate their abilities. Nowadays, however, the current meta is that generally people have drain expertise maxed out. So you apply this effect to them, it's going to last for maybe a second, and it'll be considerably lower effect on them. Even if you have the skill max as well, it's just not going to be very effective. For me personally, Polaron is the weakest damage type in the game. Moving on to Tetrion, this is one that's commonly considered to be the weakest weapon in the game. And that's because Tetrion has 2.5% chance to do increased damage to shields. That in itself is actually quite good. You can strip shields off an enemy far faster with this weapon than most other weapon types. However, it seems to have an innate disadvantage when it comes to the hull. As soon as you start hitting the hull of an enemy, this does less damage. I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but basically, if you're not hitting shields, this weapon type doesn't really do enough damage. So these are all the energy types. Now in terms of your beams, as I said before, you've got dual beam banks. These do more damage, but they have a significantly lesser targeting arc. The arc beam arrays, now these have a much larger targeting arc, but they only get specific bonuses on them, which I think is one of each. Is accuracy, damage, and critical chance or something like that. And you can't change that. You can't get damage times 3 or critical damage times 3, so you can't specialize on a particular bonus on a weapon. You can only get what it gives you. So although they do the same damage, but with a 360-degree targeting arc, you can't get as good bonuses on them, so some would say they're not as good. In terms of cannons, you've got dual heavies, effectively the difference between dual heavies and normals is these get a critical severity bonus. So, well, that and they do more damage. DPS of these 380.9, the critical severity is 20. The DPS of these is 380.9, critical severity is plus 30. The difference in terms of damage, and why I say that dual heavies, it doesn't matter whether these are arc or normal, the damage is still the same. The reason I say that these do more damage is that they do more spike damage. Okay, so they're 476.1 anti-proton damage. The DPS is the same because these cannons are slightly slower than your standard dual cannons. But the damage of these is 317.4 in comparison to your 476.1. So these are very, very slow, heavy, hard-hitting weapons. Their overall damage per second is the same as normal cannons. They just hit harder, slower. So this is a little bit one of those personal preferences. Plus, you do get the crit severity bonus, which kind of makes it worth it. The only real advantage... Oh, no, that's... Yeah, that's right. Dual cannons. The only real advantage is these take less weapon power. So, I guess that's down to you. Cannons, honestly, I wouldn't bother. You have access to dual cannons. Why would you want single cannons? And turrets, you put them at the back of your ship. It's as simple as that. If you're running an escort, you run cannons, maybe a torpedo, maybe a dual beam bank, whatever you fancy at the front. In the rear, you run turrets. Turrets are affected by the same damage increasing skills as cannons. So if you run cannons, you run turrets. End of. You do not run beams. You maybe run one dual beam for beam overload, but that's your lot. Hope this video has been of help to everyone. Now, I know there are about 30 different lockbox weapon types that all have slightly different effects. Phase Polaron, Coalition, Elachi, etc. Honestly, those, research them yourself. If you want good stats on those weapons, it will cost you an astronomical amount of money. So I would highly recommend that you research them yourself so you're confident with your decision to buy them instead of listening to some random guy on YouTube. Anyway, that's it from me today, guys. Hopefully it's been of some help to you. Take care.